We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And Tom has a hard out today in about an hour 45, so I'm not sure what exactly will happen. We might bust through questions, and then I've got a thingy at the end about gaming headsets that I could do on my own, but we don't. We'll see what happens. No promises.
Yeah, there's a hurricane
Yeah.
coming my way, and my son is in a virtual Boy Scout camp.
Okay.
So he's got a lunch from 12 to 2. So we're fitting this in.
I see.
He uses my computer.
Okay.
And this will just not overlap with all the video and stuff he's doing. So I spent all morning essentially emptying my garage, and this looks to be a similar storm to Ada, and Ada got water within a couple inches of my house.
Oh, okay.
So
Is this Elsa? Tropical Storm Elsa?
It's Elsa.
Okay.
Yes. So we'll see. We're not. My wife's freaking out just a little bit, which is totally understandable. She's lived her whole life and never really had to worry about storms, and neither of us paid 2 cents worth of attention to Ada, and then about a quarter of our neighborhood got flooded in some way.
Yeah, like
where
when I was
houses
just
have to be.
looking up this storm pattern online, it was mostly looking like it was starting on the west coast of Florida, and you're more to the east coast. But
No, I am on the west.
Oh, you're
coast
on the
of
west
Florida.
coast.
I'm on the west coast. Yes, I'm on Tampa. Tampa.
Oh, okay.
Area.
I thought you were more on the east coast.
No, I'm not. So yes, it's we're worried about storm surge. That's pretty much what we're not worried about anything else. We're just if everything stays the way it's predicted, the storm passes fairly quickly, we should be fine. But on top of all that,
Yup.
we were supposed to house sit or babysit this dog who's supposed to arrive tomorrow in the afternoon sometime. And I'm trying to tell a lady who I don't know because it's through a service. It's gonna be fine. You might not be able to get here. I might have to come get the dog.
Right.
But it'll be fine. And if not, I've got backup plans. And she's like, freaking out.
Ah.
So, yeah. And the other dog that we were babysitting left today. So So I got up this morning and immediately hit the ground running. I was emptying out the garage. I was getting rid of stuff. Was taking stuff to the dump to get that we had been collecting kind of around in the garage and behind the house. That sounds like we have a like some sort of weird cars on blocks thing, but no, it's just like bags of leaves and stuff my wife had swept up over the weekend because we had some family in town that we also dealt with over the weekend. They left today as well, so it's been kind of a thing. So, I don't know. I should be out there right now, like sealing up our doors and trying to prevent any flooding in the house. But instead, I'm doing this podcast.
That's
so,
right.
Send those donations in.
Yeah. Well, my weather is pretty much back to normal, so I'm much more comfortable than last week. But the interior of BC is all on fire, so
That'll happen.
It's just great times all around. Yeah, and that horrible heat wave is making its way east across Canada. So all the people in the prairies, hello, I know what you endured for 3 days.
All right. This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All they have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com. Leave us a comment there. Facebook.com/AVRant Podcast. YouTube.com/AVRant. You can contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's at First Reflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter's at avrant_Tom. We're going to get straight into our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, you support the podcast in some way. If you want to do that financially, you can go to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and my computer just switched from rain coming to weather alert.
Yes.
I know. We've been talking about it for a while. So click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and it takes you to a PayPal donation site. So we're going to thank Levi and Kevin for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Levi, and thank you, Kevin.
Yes, indeed. Levi, Kevin, thank you both very much for the financial support. That's a PayPal donation they made by going to avrant.com. So thank you very much.
Yeah. I want to thank our 126 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where you can sign up to become a contributing, subscribing listener / supporter of our podcast, which every month Patreon will take some money from you and give most of it to us. So it goes ongoing. So until you tell them not to do it anymore, they'll do it. So our 126 patrons over our Patreon, including Rob and Fred.
Yeah, patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. If you would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation, $1 is the minimum, as much as you want is the maximum. So 126 patrons over there. Thank you very much for the support. Rob and Fred, thank you for being two of them.
That's right. I'm going to say congratulations to DJ. I don't know why. Hanger on of coattails. He who shall ride our shooting star straight to the moon, or whatever it is. That's us.
Chances are he's going to overtake us and listeners pretty darn quick, to be honest. So
I'll be honest with you. Yeah, it's probably going to happen. So anyways, he chatted with Brent Butterworth on the Brightside Home Theater podcast, which he was thrilled about, and he gave a big shout out to us, saying we've been very encouraging and helped him work towards booking guests that he's dreamed about talking to. So congratulations, DJ.
Yeah. Dan, thank you for he always gives us kind words, so thank you, DJ, for that. And we have chatted we've chatted with Brent Butterworth, and he is a very down-to-earth guy. He's been in the industry for ages and ages, knows a lot of people, has met a lot of people, has been a lot of places, and has heard a ton of equipment and reviewed most of it. But still a great guy to chat to, and very down-to-earth, and has remained humble and open and willing to talk and answer questions. So that is great, and DJ obviously had a very enjoyable time talking to him on his podcast.
Good. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going, even during hurricanes, from Bob, from another Rob, not you, but a different guy. He's part of the 2 Hour Plus Club member. He says that somehow what used to be his commute time has ended up becoming part of his work day at home while his office was closed during the pandemic. That's cut down on podcast listening time, but he appreciates us going strong. Andrew shares a longer comment below, coming up, which will be coming up, I guess. Jay wanted to second Edge of Tomorrow as a great technical showcase, as well as a big budget Hollywood movie with an interesting narrative twist. Which is, I like that movie quite a bit, honestly. Yeah. As of all the movies that have you repeat the same day over and over again, it's one of my favorite. Billy Fred, he says if he had to give up podcasts, we would be the last to go. So let's cut it down here. Bob, Rob, Andrew, Jay, Billy, and Fred. So thank you for thanking us.
That is right. I'll say the names once more. Bob, Rob, Andrew, Jay, Billy, and Fred. Not Billy Fred, because you said those names really close together the first time, and it sounded like it was like hyphenated or something. But no, those are two separate people, Billy and Fred. And thank you all very much. Fred's way of saying that, I was like, you could have said we're just like your first choice podcast, but no, he went the other direction, was like, if they had to all go, we'd be the last to go. So thank you. I think that's still a very good thing.
That's still a compliment. Yeah. In the news, YouTube TV, Google streaming broadcast television service, is getting some upgrades. First, all subscribers will finally be getting Dolby 5.1 audio. Second, they will start offering 4K resolution, but it costs $20 extra because I don't know. People are mad that Netflix charges a couple extra dollars for it, and everybody else gives it to you for free. But Google's like, well, if Netflix can charge a couple extra, we can.
I mean, the main thing has to be that they have like a cloud DVR is part of YouTube TV. So recording 4K content genuinely does take up more space, and they don't limit how much you can record. So I guess that's how they're justifying $20 extra per month.
That will not last. YouTube TV is regularly priced at $65 a month. Wow, that's a lot. The 4K Plus add-on brings that to $85 a month, although if you're an existing subscriber, you can get the first 12 months for $75 a month, so $10 off. In addition to 4K, you get an unlimited number of simultaneous streams. The regular service is limited to 3. And you can download shows from the cloud DVR for offline viewing, which just, wow.
Yep.
I mean, that's just, why don't you just get cable?
At
that point,
it's starting to get close, and it's starting to come back to, people were like, why does cable cost so much? Well, now the streaming providers are starting to discover why, offering live TV. And I mean, it's still not all the channels. YouTube TV doesn't have all the channels that your cable provider could offer. So that is the offering. The price is definitely starting to inch up there. But hey, they have a plus on the end of something now. They have 4K plus, and you gotta have a plus.
Thank goodness. So you look at that and you're like, well, what if I, instead of view DVRing it for me. You just rented me a box for $10 a month instead of charging me $20 or $50 a month or whatever extra it is in order so I could just DVR it myself, because that seems whatever. I don't know. Okay, this is from Carl. Quentin Tarantino bought the Vista Theater on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles and plans to reopen the theater, which was shuttered due to the pandemic around Christmas time. It's a single screen. I feel like I've been here once. It's a single screen seating 400 people, and it will only show actual film, no digital. So it's just going to be Quentin Tarantino films. And he does plan to show new releases, though, unlike the other movie theater he owns, the New Beverly, which primarily screens films from his own collection or limited revival runs. So, wow, it just seems not smart to limit yourself just to film. It just seems
that's his whole thing, though. He wants film. He bought these theaters so he can do what he pleases with them.
That's right. Oh yeah. No, I don't care what he shows in there. It could be nothing but kids movies.
And he wants to keep film alive. He doesn't want it all to go to digital projection and digital files. He feels there is value in physical celluloid films. So that's what he's going to be doing with the Vista Theater. But that will be a place to see new release movies on actual film in Los Angeles, and that is becoming sort of a specialized thing. So, Anyway, some people were wondering if he would end up being the person to buy the ArcLight cinema, rather if he would, the Cinerama Dome, which used to be owned by ArcLight, which filed for bankruptcy. But that's AMC. AMC swept in and bought those up, so including the Cinerama Dome. So we'll see what they do with it.
All right, some comments here. Andrew, I guess this is from before.
Yeah.
Andrew from before says he wants to thank us for the approach we take when we are giving advice. He can say from his own experience that sometimes he's written in to basically just double check if you should go through with an intended purchase, and it sounds as though quite a few other people do the same. We don't always say what he wants to hear, but we do say honestly when we think something will make a worthwhile difference and when we think it won't. And also, if the money isn't a concern and you just want it, then go for it. But if the money is a concern, here's what we think, where we think it would be better spent. Okay, I think I just... I think I lost the opportunity to start sealing up doors.
Oh, so he's checking weather is what Tom is doing for audio-only listeners. If you're not seeing it on YouTube.
I'm taking my headphones off because I think it's raining. So we'll see what happens. That way of thinking has resulted in a lot of money saved in his case, and the things he has bought in our advice have made a large noticeable differences. Case in point, we said repeatedly that in his case, with the speakers he's using at the distance he's sitting, he doesn't need a separate amplifier, but he wanted one, even if it wasn't going to make an audible difference, and he could afford it. So we said, go right ahead. We bought separate amps. We don't really need them, but we don't regret having them. I actually don't have separate amps, but Rob does.
Well, you've got one, but you actually do need it for yours.
I actually needed it.
You need to expand it 2 more channels. Your receiver couldn't do that by itself.
He said that he was secretly hoping we were wrong and that the big, beefy amp for his front 3 speakers would make a huge noticeable difference, but we were right. It didn't sound any different. It didn't even make his receiver run any cooler. It was as if he hadn't changed anything at all except the amount of money in his bank account. So the amp was returned, and the nearly $1,800 spent on that could now go towards an SVS Prime wireless sound base so that he and his wife can have a convenient compact stereo in the living room, an Apple TV 4K so he can enjoy the new Atmos music offerings from Apple Music, and best of all, the big Paradigm Premier Series center speaker he's been lusting after, and he is super happy with it now that he has it. And that was money well spent. So he's thankful we give our advice and for the way that we give it. So that is a monster center channel.
that is a tower speaker turned on its side for all intents and purposes.
It's a ludicrously large center channel.
It is a horizontal center. It's got the tweeter right above a small mid-range driver right in the middle of the speaker with 4 woofers, 2 on either side. So it is definitely meant to be positioned horizontally. But yeah, size-wise, if you're not seeing the image on YouTube or in the Flickr album, it definitely looks like a tower speaker turned on its side. It is flanked by a pair of 2-way bookshelf speakers, which appear to be much smaller, but he is not sitting terribly far away, and he really wanted that sender and has wanted it for quite a while, and now he has it, so he is happy, and he says it sounds exceedingly clear and detailed, and he's very, very pleased with its sound quality.
All right, so the Xbox. Before we go on to
Okay.
our questions here, the Xbox. Rob and I talked about this a little bit after the last podcast, but we didn't talk about it on the podcast
Okay.
because we had talked about the pass-through, the ability to pass through.
Yes, so there is a
bitstream audio.
setting in the audio settings of the Xbox. There's a check mark box now available that says it actually just says pass through audio, right? I think those are the or the words that it uses, and if you highlight it, it gives a little description saying that you won't get your menu and button click sounds anymore while you're in a game or using a streaming service, but it'll pass through the original format of the audio, whatever that might be. That's the description given. So from there.
Right. So I clicked it, but above that, it still has the ability to
Right.
select which type of bitstream it does if it you know
Yeah.
it if you're not doing the pass through. So before it was surround, Dolby surround, or whatever, stereo, whatever it is, and then
You had
Atmos.
stereo, uncompressed PCM in either 5.1 or 7.1, and then you could choose Atmos or DTS-X that got added a little while ago.
Yeah, so I hadn't noticed the DTS-X.
Okay.
So the DTS-X, I noticed for the first time this time, so I selected that.
Okay.
So once I started going in and watching different streaming services, I noticed I was just getting DTS-X.
Okay.
So I told Rob this last week and said, "Man, I don't think this pass-through crap works. It doesn't seem to work." And he's like, "No, it's supposed to work." I'm like, "Well, okay." So upon further testing,
Okay.
it does work.
Okay.
It just doesn't work for all apps.
Not for every app. Yeah, okay, yeah. So
No.
the apps
So
themselves have
some
to be
apps-
updated to support it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So some apps work. It works, and some apps it does not. So
Okay.
you have to just, I guess, wait until Netflix and whatever the other one. I know Twitch doesn't. YouTube doesn't. I think those three for sure do not work. I thought that it worked on Hulu and maybe Amazon Prime, but
Right.
I'm not 100% on that. I will say the DTS-X upmixing is, your upper surrounds are so freaking loud.
It-
the Atmos, the ceiling speakers
Yes,
are
it
so loud.
enhances the overhead speakers, let us say.
Oh
so that
my
you
goodness.
will notice that you have speakers above you.
You will know that.
Yeah.
We watched. So I put in the Ultra HD Blu-ray, which was the Enter the Spider-Verse, which only has DTS-X. It does not have.
Okay.
It does not have the. No, it only has DTS Master Audio. It didn't have
Okay.
DTS-X. So it got upmixed, and I was like, "Holy crap! There's so much sound going on above me." I will say that for Ultra HD Blu-rays, it was very dim. Like the image I was getting out of it was very dim and not nearly as detailed as I've seen in the past.
Yeah, because you've got a Sony player and you're
Right.
connecting that to a 1080p non-HDR display. So there's
No, I was doing the 4K. The Ultra HD Blu-ray through the Xbox, and compared to the Sony, it was dim.
Yeah, but your display is still a 1080p
Yes, my display
non-HDR
is still
display.
1080p.
So there's HDR to SDR conversion going on, and yeah, the Sonys have like a little menu where you can adjust how bright or dim the HDR to SDR conversion looks, just a little bit, but thankfully it's enough. The Xbox has no such adjustment in HDR to SDR conversion. You just get the straight whatever it decides to do. So okay, all right.
So I was
it's
planning
different.
on. I was trying to get rid of my Sony. I was going to give it to
Right.
somebody, but now I'm going to put it back in.
All right.
All right, questions here. So, anyways, if you've got an Xbox
Series X.
One or Series X or whatever it is that's out there that has that pass through,
Yeah.
it does work, but not for everything.
Yeah,
Not yet.
and hopefully
So
the
give it
apps
some
will get
time.
updated. And it makes sense that you still have to select some kind of default bitstream to output, because for just the menus and for any apps that don't support pass-through yet, you have to have some kind of audio coming out, so you're still selecting the default. Okay.
Right. We did rent Tom and Jerry.
The new one, yeah.
I let my kids select the movie. I sent it with my wife, and they came back, and my wife was like, "Well, they were going to do this or the King Kong." I looked at her dead in the eye. I said, "Which one do you think I would have chosen?" She goes, "Yeah, I know."
Yeah.
So, they came back with Tom. It was fine. It was very dumb, and it had a lot of the same gags that I'm used to seeing. But my kids have never, especially my youngest one, have never really seen any of those gags. So he was just rolling. He thought it was hilarious. But I thought that they kind of leaned into the whole. Some things are cartoons and some things aren't. It wasn't quite the Roger Rabbit sort of thing. It was just sort of everybody. No one really acknowledged it. It was just, hey, yeah, that dog can talk.
Yeah.
Because reasons. But it was fine. It was a good kids movie.
For people wondering, I couldn't confirm anything on my Xbox Series X because mine is away right now. It turned out the one that I gave to my nephew for his graduation, it had a weird glitch where we did find a few other people online describing the same glitch. It seemed to only affect Xbox 360 games, and it put these flashing black blocks on some games, some much worse than others. Fallout 3 was the most obvious by a country mile with these huge flashing black blocks all over it. So since he uses his Xbox Series X much more than I do, I gave mine to my nephew. I took back my nephew's one, so we swapped, and I got in touch with Microsoft, who, I have to say, responded exceedingly quickly to a customer service request. Were very helpful, and after chatting with them for about 20 minutes, because they were very thorough to make sure that they weren't going to swap out a defective Xbox just because somebody made a user settings error or something like that. But
right, I don't blame them.
I was very thorough and knew how to talk about it, and had two of them to compare, because my nephew and I compared the exact same games on the exact same TV with the exact same cables and everything, and the console I had worked perfectly and his had these glitches. So that is away and will be coming back, and it has not reached them via the shipping tracking yet, but that's what's going on with my Xbox.
Okay. All right, let's get to the questions here. Yeah. Gary, Infinite Gary. Gary would like to understand what is happening to the signal and when in the following scenarios. Where is the digital to analog conversion happening, and how is each device in the chain affecting the signal? His Marantz CD player connected via coax digital to a fully active bookshelf speaker. The DAC is inside the speaker.
That's right. Yeah, so you got the digital signal coming off that is in PCM format, pulse code modulation format. The disc player is reading that. It's sending that straight out. It hasn't done anything to the signal. It read it right off of the CD disc, sent it out via the digital coax cable, and your fully active bookshelf speakers, they are decoding it or converting PCM to analog and then amplifying it, because they have amplifiers built in, and playing it. So pretty much everything is happening inside the speakers.
All right. So his next scenario is CD player via coax digital to stereo preamp, and then analog RCA cables to a pair of active speakers. It's happening at the preamp.
That is where the digital analog conversion is happening, yes. Similar thing coming off the disc, PCM format. Now that's going into the preamp. The preamp is converting that to analog. It is giving you volume control, so it is adjusting the voltage gain that is coming out of the preamplifier, but then that is being fed via analog to your active speakers. The active speakers are amplifying the analog signal and then playing it out of the transducers.
So the last scenario, CD player via analog RCA cables to a stereo preamp, then RCA from that preamp to active speakers. This one is a little bit more dependent on the preamp that you have. Okay. Because in theory, it should go, it's basically happening at the CD player.
That's where the digital to analog conversion is happening. Yep.
That's where it's happening, and then it should go into the preamp, and the preamp should do very little to it, except for adjust volume.
That's right.
Maybe, and then send it out to the active speakers. In theory. But depending on the stereo preamp you have, it may, because of bass management or because of other ways that it works in there, it may convert it back to digital so it can do whatever it needs to do, and then convert it back to analog before sending it out. So it's definitely happening at the CD player. It may also be unhappening and then rehappening at the stereo preamp, depending on which one you have.
Yeah, because
without having a model number in front of us, we can't possibly know.
Yeah, if it's an all analog stereo preamp, which if it's the same one you plugged your digital coax cable into, then we know it isn't all analog.
It isn't, right.
But if your stereo preamp has, technically there are a handful of stereo preamps out there that have analog bass management, but it's not very many. So chances are, if your stereo preamplifier offers bass management, it's probably converting the analog audio into digital and then doing the bass management digitally and then converting that back to analog again and sending out to your speakers. If it has any type of room correction, if it's one of the Yamaha stereo receivers that has YPOW built in, that is definitely doing that digitally, so it's converting the analog from the CD player back into digital. If it has digital volume control, anything that is done in the digital domain, it means it's converting it back into digital before then after it's done its digital correction, converting it to analog again.
most things these days would be operating in this way because it's just so much easier to do everything in the digital domain.
Many are, yeah.
So his last question is that in that last scenario, is the preamp doing anything? Well, it might be doing a lot more than you want it to do, but
possibly.
Let's pretend it's everything's going through in an analog. It doesn't convert stuff back to digital. It's its only job to pass along the signal without degrading it in any way. Well, that's always its job, right?
Sure.
It doesn't matter what it's doing. I mean, it could be converting it to digital and analog back again 7,000 times. In the end, you should be getting out exactly what came in, except for splitting it out and changing the volume. So it is doing something. It's even if it stays straight analog, it's still going to modulate the volume in some way.
Yeah.
In theory, it might have bass management applied, even if it's in the analog domain. I think Emotiva had for a while a preamp that they had that was all analog bass management.
Yeah, there was nothing digital in that model at all.
Yeah, that was. Everybody's like, "Well, how's that bass management work?" And we all went, "Not very well." But it did.
Well, it applied some filters.
It applied. It did some things.
Yeah,
but it was. It's just overly complicated in this day and age. So it should always come out the other side exactly the same way it went in. That should always be the case.
I mean, unless you are purposely applying bass management or equalization. Like if you're applying equalization, what is coming out is not exactly what came in, but that's on purpose. You're doing that intentionally. Right. If we're assuming, Gary, that your preamplifier is straight through analog, that it isn't doing any sort of analog to digital conversion to apply digital processing to it, if it has that functionality, then it is still applying volume control. That is just adjusting the voltage gain. It's a very small change that it's making, but it is still giving you a volume knob. So it's not doing literally nothing. And this is the reason why we don't typically connect the analog outputs of a CD player directly to a pair of passive speakers, right? Well, wouldn't be passive speakers, but let's even say speakers that have amplifiers built in but don't have any digital to analog conversion or any type of digital processing. They just take the analog signal and amplify it inside of the cabinet of the speaker. We don't typically connect those directly to a CD player because you want the volume control if nothing else.
Right. Yeah. Not only do you want the volume control, but you're going to end up with a signal that's not going to be very strong.
Oh, yes.
It's going to be very, very quiet.
That basic line level analog signal is a pretty weak signal.
Yeah, it's a pretty weak signal. All right. Bob is waiting for all the HDMI 2.1 dust to settle before buying a new receiver. And really, when it settles, we'll start talking about 2.2. Just in case you're wondering what's coming down the line. HDMI's sole mission in life is to just absolutely mess with you.
Actually, I'm quite certain there's already a 2.1a revision of some sort. I'm pretty sure I already saw that.
I haven't seen
part
it,
of HDMI. I can't remember what's in there, but I'm pretty sure that's already a new specification.
So when he buys a new receiver, he figures he'll go for a 9-channel model. He's heard us say many times that we prefer having at least 4 overhead speakers so that the overhead surrounds can be moved, overhead sounds can be moved front to back in addition to side, and that makes sense to him. But hypothetically, if you only had 2 overhead speakers, why can't the receiver still move any overhead sounds front to back by mixing some of the sounds in the fronts, the surrounds, and surround back speakers as appropriate? Isn't that how object-based audio is supposed to work? Put the sounds into the speakers if they are physically in the correct locations, but if a speaker isn't right where the sound needs to be, then do the best with whatever speakers you have. Is it that receivers can't do that with only 1 pair of overhead speakers for some reason, or doesn't actually try, but we're saying it just doesn't sound as good that way? Bottom line, is it a technical limitation or just a psychoacoustic one? Well, yeah. If it is being applied the way that it's supposed to, if it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, then yes, you are right. It'll use some combination of all the speakers available in order to try to place the sound. Yeah. But let's just say that the technology and the ability of the people who are using the technology haven't quite gotten to the same level yet. I think there's still a lot of movies that are still mixed with that almost 7.1 channel channel mixing at the bottom level, and then they try to apply Atmos to the top, or the object-based stuff to the top, but it's not still
just that. Even like there actually is a technical limitation in the current authoring software for the object-based audio formats, Dolby Atmos, DTS-X. Because the way that they're actually authored, there are two separate layers. There is the bed speaker layer, the floor level, the ear level speaker layer, and there is the overhead speaker layer. And the sounds do not intermix. Now, Josh Zyber, he really went into detail to that when he was doing a lot of testing over at High Def Digest. And what he basically discovered was that if you only have 2 overhead speakers versus having 4 or 6, then all of the sounds that might have come out of 4 or 6 overhead speakers, all those sounds come out exclusively from just the 2 overhead speakers. Now, theoretically, could object-based audio allow sounds to be mixed into both layers, allow sounds to utilize all the speakers, whatever those speakers are, wherever they might be? Theoretically, is that possible? Yes, but it is not the practical way in which it is being currently authored and applied. The way that the Dolby Atmos and DTS-X, and as far as I know, even Oro 3D object-based formats are currently being authored and applied. There are 2 distinct separate layers, and if you say that this sound is in the overhead layer, it gets stuck in whatever speakers you have overhead. If that's only 2, it is exclusively in those 2. So your idea is absolutely right. You're thinking along the right lines. That's the way we would kind of like it to work. But practically speaking, really it doesn't.
And I think that there's, I don't know if it's a limitation of how much space they have on discs or through streams or whatever. But what they really should have is that base layer, kind of like your Dolby Digital layer, whatever that is, or as the base, and then the Atmos layer is all of the speakers. It kind of overrides that, but they don't do that. They add on right now. So yeah, there's one other aspect to this. I'm probably going to mention it again because it's a little bit more applicable in an upcoming question of Bob's. But there are the Dolby Atmos height virtualization and the DTS. What the heck is their thing for the Virtual X? It's just DTS Virtual X. And those are listening modes that you can apply if you tell your AV receiver that you have 0 overhead speakers. If you say I have 5 or 7 speakers, but they're all the traditional floor level speakers, and I have 0 overhead and 0 up-firing speakers, then you can choose DTS Virtual X or Dolby Surround height virtualization as your listening mode. And you might be saying, well, if I can do that, then why can't I have 2 overhead speakers plus 2 virtual speakers, right? Why can't I mix and match? Again, the idea behind that makes perfect logical sense, but for practical purposes, the way it's implemented, they don't let you do that. They don't let you play what is the overhead layer sounds out of your bed level speakers unless the only speakers you have are bed level speakers. If all you have are bed level speakers, then they aren't going to make the overhead sounds silent. They aren't going to take those sounds away. They'll get put into the bed level speakers. Even if you have an older AV receiver that doesn't have height virtualization or DTS Virtual X, you'll still get all the sounds. All the sounds will play out of your 5 or 7 bed level speakers. They don't just go silent and disappear. But as soon as you have any number of overhead speakers, all the overhead layer sounds get put into those, and there's no mixing between the 2 layers. It's weird, but that's the way it is. So looking at the speaker setup options as listed in various receiver manuals, it seems like you basically have to select some combination of predefined speaker positions. He can understand that on, say, a less expensive 7-channel model, it just doesn't have the processing power to allow for literally unlimited speaker position options. But to him, it's a little disappointing that the way object-based audio is implemented, you can't just put your speakers wherever you want and then either input that information, maybe via coordinates, or have your speaker locations detected somehow, which is what ARC does, if you're in that Anthem.
No, Trinov. Trinov's the only one that does that.
Trinov is the one, I'm sorry. Yeah. Trinov's the one.
Not Anthem Room Correction, but Trinov does that.
Trinov, that's right.
Trinov Optimizer.
Even with the selection of predefined speaker positions, why can't the object audio renderer fake a virtually unlimited number of overhead locations via the combination of the bed layer speakers and just 2 overhead speakers? Is it kind of just a ploy to make you need a 9-channel receiver. There's a big price difference going from 7-channel to 9-channel models. So is the difference in the audible experience actually necessary, and 7 speakers genuinely isn't enough, or is it a bit of manipulation to get us to pay more for 9-channel models? So okay, as cynical as I am, I actually don't think that they're doing this simply so that you'll buy more speaker channels in your. I honestly think it's more of a technological problem more than anything. We've talked about, since they talked about object audio, since they introduced before we ever saw a receiver. I said many times, if they would just allow you to put your speakers wherever you want and then use those speakers, that would be the goal.
Yeah, detect where they actually are in the room. Like at present, they say, okay, here are the names of the speaker locations, and they give you a small range, right? They're supposed to be within these angles, and as long as you're within that range of angles, you're at least roughly in the locations where they want your speakers to be. But you're given those predefined, ranges where the speaker is supposed to go with predefined names of what those speakers should be. They don't just let you. I mean, you wouldn't literally put all your speakers like stacked on top of each other all at the front of the room. Well, some people might, but that wouldn't work very well. You would need to spread them out somewhat in order for it to make any sense. But you can't just put them like anywhere and have it detect. So Tom was saying that was the dream, but not the reality.
Right. That's not how it's worked out. And like Rob said, because they have limited things the way they have, that in the authoring software on top of that has kind of taken advantage of knowing that there's going to be speakers in these locations, and it just hasn't. I mean, there's only so much processing power they can put into a receiver at a certain price point and everything else. So I think there's a lot of factors that go on here. I think the goal still is going to be that more Trinnov model of you've got like the weird Frisbee disc thing, and it senses.
Well, the Trinnov is like it almost looks like a 3-dimensional trident. It's actually got 4 little microphones, 3 of them in a triangle, and then a 4th one that's above the other one. Yeah. So it looks like some kind of Poseidon trident when you're looking. It's kind of cool. It's a neat industrial design, but that's so that it can triangulate 3-dimensionally, not just azimuth angles, but elevation angles as well. So, I mean, Trinnov is more or less doing what you're talking about. Now, it's interesting because it's still taking these audio codecs. They're still they're not encoded any differently. When you play back Dolby Atmos or DTS:X on a Trinnov altitude processor, it's not as though the signal coming in is any different. It's still coming in decoded just like it is on any other Atmos or DTS:X decoder, but then they can, after that decoding, apply their special Trinnov processing. That one does detect the actual angle locations, both azimuth and elevation, of where your speakers truly are. But then it's still trying to take the directional information in Atmos or DTS:X, which is basing itself upon the predefined speaker locations, and then what Trinnov is doing is saying, okay, I'm still going to put those sounds where the predefined Atmos and DTS:X speaker locations are, and then I'm going to say, okay, the sounds are where they should be. Do you actually have a speaker there? No? Well, now I'm going to apply my Trinnov processing to manipulate the sound to come out of the speakers you do have to try and make it sound like it's coming from one of those predefined locations. So it's this weird combination of the signal itself is still working on the assumption of predefined locations. Trinnov is just saying, okay, I'm still going to make the sounds come from those predefined locations, but I'm going to manipulate based on the speakers you actually have to do it. So it's still not truly applying object-based audio in the way that Bob is imagining, where, hey, there's just coordinates attached to these sounds, and regardless of where your speakers are, let's just use whatever combination of speakers to make the sound come from those coordinates. It's still an abstract, one layer of abstraction from that sort of idea. Yeah.
And I don't know that we'll ever truly get there.
I mean, it seems like eventually that seems like that's the idea eventually, but yeah.
So the question becomes at some point, do we get there fast enough for something new not to come out that upstages it? And that's where I'm thinking. I'm thinking that, or that people they just decide this overhead thing's not working. Nobody's buying it.
I mean, quite a bit of success is happening with having object-based audio, but for headphones. They're having quite a bit of success with that, and honestly, in a way, it makes a lot of sense, right? If you just have two speakers, but you can apply a head-related transfer function to whatever's coming out, and then object-based audio, so that the sounds are now moving around. You're only manipulating two speakers that are right on your ears, but you're doing so in a way that makes it sound like it's outside of your head and coming from any direction around you. They're having quite a bit of success, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right. We'll see what happens with everything else. Right now, I feel like Atmos is the new, whatever, for selling sound bars and stuff like that. It's the buzzword. People are like, oh, I got the Atmos sound bar, and therefore, the sound sounds like it's coming from all around me now, where it never did before. I'm like, but it's exactly the same. It's the same. Oh no, it's bouncing off the ceiling. It's not. It's not bouncing off the ceiling. Stop saying that.
But that whole thing about, whether it's actually bouncing off the ceiling or not, the irony is, because he was asking, there is this price difference that happens as soon as you go from any of the 7-channel models to the 9-channel models. And a lot of the 9-channel models can actually process 11 speakers, but they just have 9 amplifiers built in. And then you can expand it to 11 if you add a 2-channel external amp. But there is a price delta there. And the irony is, if you were to get one of the 7-channel models, but don't apply it as 5.1.2, instead apply it as traditional 7.1, then you'll be able to use that Dolby Atmos height virtualization, or the DTS Virtual X. And honestly, in a lot of setups, in a lot of rooms, that sounds better than physically having just 2 overhead speakers. Like, I'm actually kind of in favor of setting up a traditional 5.1 or 7.1, or of course we would have 2 subs, but signal-wise, it's a single LFE channel. So set up a traditional 5.1 or 7.1 and then actually make use of like DTS Virtual X. It does a pretty darn good job. That's what all the sound bars are doing. They don't have speakers on the ceiling. They are virtualizing the overhead sounds. Yeah,
I don't know how many times I've seen people like, I had an Atmos sound bar, but now I'm moving to a new place and the ceilings are vaulted, so I can't use this anymore. I'm like, you kind of can.
Yeah, but yes,
I don't want to say it on Reddit because I'll get absolutely flamed out, but you absolutely can. So,
but yes, having 4 speakers, physically actual speakers above you, that is the best. If you want the best experience that Dolby Atmos and DTS-X can deliver, that is the best. But I would actually make the argument that if you don't want to pay for a 9-channel receiver model and you don't want to put 4 speakers physically overhead, give the virtualization a try instead of putting only 2 up there. I think it's worth that.
All right, Rob. This is not our Rob, it's a different Rob. Rob is using a 65-inch LG B9. I did something.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, hold on.
Sounded like everything was all right, but I don't know what's on the scene.
I don't know what happened. Something happened. I touched my screen and now everything's weird. All
dear.
Right. He's using a 65-inch LG B9 OLED TV with a Marantz SR6010 receiver and an Xbox Series X. He is only been able to get 120 hertz in VRR from his Xbox working if he plugs directly into his TV. If he plugs the Xbox into his receiver, it seems to be limited to 4K 60 and VRR doesn't work. Is that because his receiver is about 30 feet away? Would a new HDMI cable solve the issue? Wait, 6010?
6010. That is going back a ways, and it cannot pass through. It does not have HDMI 2.1 of any kind, and you need HDMI 2.1. In fact, you need the latest versions of HDMI 2.1. Sending 4K 120 and VRR through an AV receiver is still a dicey proposition.
Well, yeah, and it's hard to come by too. It's not just hard to do, but it's hard to come by.
That's right. The 2020 Denon and Marantz models are actually the only ones that you can buy right this second that can pass all that stuff through. You have to apply on Denon or Marantz's website to get the SPK 618 adapter to let you do it with an Xbox Series X, but it does actually work. The 2020 Yamaha models that were supposed to do it, they never got the firmware update. You can send them in for a hardware upgrade, but after that, you still have to wait for a firmware update that hasn't arrived yet. The 2021 Yamahas are waiting on a firmware update, and the pre-production Onkyo RZ models, they're working, but you can't buy them yet. So, it's a dicey situation, and there is zero chance of your Marantz SR6010 doing it. It does not have HDMI 2.1 of any kind. So it's not the HDMI cable at all.
So he says without buying a whole new receiver, he can get maximum video quality from his Xbox by plugging it straight into the TV. Then for audio, he has to rely on eARC, correct? And that is correct, as long as 6010 supports eARC.
And that's the thing, it does not. It supports HDMI audio return channel, but not the enhanced audio return channel.
Which means you will not get Dolby, whatever, True HD or Master Audio. You can't get that. Or Atmos or any of that. You'll get like Dolby Digital or...
Well, okay, so in certain circumstances, you can get Atmos if it is in Dolby Digital Plus. So, for example, the version of Atmos that Netflix uses, that is Dolby Digital Plus with an Atmos extension. And the SR6010 can accept that over regular audio return channel. But it does not have enhanced audio return channel, so there's no 5.1 or 7.1 uncompressed PCM. You can't use that over regular ARC. You would have to output Dolby Digital, DTS, and in some cases, Dolby Digital Plus. That's as high as you can go.
Okay. So when he uses HDMI ARC, there is no way to bring up the receiver's info on the screen. With sources that are plugged into the AV receiver, you can bring up the receiver's info menu to see what kind of signal is coming in, what kind of signal the receiver is sending out, and if he presses any of the sound mode buttons, he can see a list of the available listening modes on screen. It seems as though none of that is possible when using HDMI ARC, and that applies to both his Xbox and to any of the TV's built-in streaming apps. So is there a way to see that info? He'd like at least to confirm what type of audio signal is being sent to his receiver and then confirm which decoder and or upmixer is being applied. So that's fun.
Wouldn't
that's
that be
a fun
nice?
thing. Yeah, that's a fun little perk of HDMI ARC. It's like you can send the audio back down or up in all these different directions. It's just you're going to lose all the functionality that you might actually want to.
And I mean, of course, that kind of makes sense because the video that your television is displaying is coming directly from the Xbox. It is not at this point receiving a video signal of any kind from the AV receiver.
Which is why I can't do an overlay on top of it to show you all of these things. So you have to actually look at the front of the receiver, which you can see all of the stuff, most of the stuff, on the front of the receiver. Like, especially, I know the sound modes in particular.
Well, you'll be able to see the sound mode because, remember, he has an SR6010, and all it has is the little porthole display.
The porthole.
It doesn't have a full front panel display.
You can't open you used to be able to open them. And
that's
get,
only
like,
on the 7010. You have to go
Oh.
up a series where it's below the flap. No, the 6010 only has the little porthole. It has no other display, and his is 30 feet away, and I'm guessing maybe in a closet or in an adjacent room or something.
Wait, you're not going to be able to see that quarter-sized porthole from 30 feet away? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Hey, come on. Just get your binoculars out. Get your monocle. Put your monocle up.
If you are willing to walk yourself over to a position where you can legibly read that little porthole display, basically the best you can do in this scenario is you can press any of your sound mode buttons, those movie, music, game, pure sound mode buttons on your Marantz remote. When you do that, it won't list all the available sound modes, but it will cycle through them on the little porthole display. Now, the best you're going to be able to do is one of those options, the first option that comes up when you press any of the sound mode buttons other than pure. We would suggest sticking with the game mode button and nothing else. When you press the game mode button, the first option will just show you whatever type of signal is coming in, that's what it's going to decode. Now, you, as we mentioned, are going to be limited to stereo, Dolby Digital, DTS, and in some cases, Dolby Digital Plus. You're never going to see anything beyond that. Then you're going to have the option to apply an upmixer to any of those signals. But yeah, you're not, well, I guess it might say Atmos if it's Dolby Digital Plus with an Atmos extension. It might say Atmos as the listening mode, the first one, but that's about the best you can do. Because if you're just trying to detect, okay, what kind of signal is my Xbox sending to my TV and then my TV is relaying back to my receiver via audio return channel, your best indication is going to be what sound modes are available when I press the game mode button.
And if you've ever changed them, it's going to remember what you changed it to.
That's right.
And that's what you're going to see.
So you're kind of going to have to cycle through.
Yeah, you'll have to scroll up and down until you get to something that looks, I don't know. And we even know how to, because I'm thinking about how it goes. I think it goes whatever the actual thing is coming in, and then either I think Dolby Surround upmixer, DTS Neural X upmixer, multi-channel PC multi-channel input or something like that.
Well, if that's
PCM?
available, if that's
available,
coming in, yeah.
And then like virtual,
yeah, because
virtual will be next, and then maybe
Dan and
something else
Amaranth's
after
own DSP is the virtual one. So yeah, I mean, because pressing the info button with the little porthole display, it doesn't give you all the info that you could see if you had the on-screen display. So it is annoying, it is frustrating, but it is going to be one of the four, or I guess five. It's going to be stereo, Dolby Digital DTS, Dolby Digital Plus, or Atmos if it's Dolby Digital Plus with Atmos. It's going to be one of those. That's all you can get over ARC.
Yeah, so this is one of those situations where you're going to want to just like, don't do any of that. just hope that everything's working fine, and then use something else to stream.
Like, I wonder if he's like set his Xbox Series X to do bitstream Atmos output and like nothing's working right, and that would totally make sense because while his TV can accept the PCM plus Atmos extension, because that's what the Series X is sending out when you choose that as your audio format, while the TV can accept that, it can't send it via regular ARC. If you had eARC, it could, but you don't have eARC, you have regular ARC. So it totally makes sense that he's like, all I'm getting is stereo. Yeah, that might be the case because the TV might be down mixing the Atmos that's coming out of the Series X so that it can send it via ARC to your receiver, and all it's sending is stereo.
You can turn off the pass-through and turn on Dolby Digital 5.1.
Well, that's the thing. You probably want Dolby Digital. That's probably your very best option. We're talking from the Series X. In terms of choosing the bitstream coming out of the Series X, probably Dolby Digital is your best choice because of the limitations.
Go into the audio settings, turn off the bitstream pass-through, go back up to the turn off the pass-through, go up to the bitstream out, and then set it to bitstream, and then set it to only output 5.1.
Dolby Digital, yeah. Because 5.1 uncompressed isn't going to work either.
Nope. You need it to be compressed.
Yup.
Yeah, just think of this as motivation to buy your new receiver. I guess, okay, so we've got one more question from him.
Yeah.
So we've maybe left the biggest problem for last. When he has the Xbox Series X connected to his TV and then uses HDMI ARC to send the audio to his receiver, he has a synchronization issue. The video is ahead of the audio. Both the TV and the receiver offer audio delay settings, but those only seem to let him delay the audio even more, which obviously doesn't help. Is there a way to apply a negative delay? No.
Well, there's some kind of fun things here.
Right.
So first of all, I would definitely double check in your B9 OLED. Did you turn on eARC in the OLED? The OLED has an audio. It's in the advanced part of the audio settings where you can turn eARC on or off. I'm betting he turned that on thinking, hey, I want it, but your AV receiver doesn't have it. So turn off eARC, it'll go back to regular ARC, and see if that fixes the issue. Because like I say, right now, your television, because the television itself actually has all the decoders built into it, it's accepting whatever is coming out of your Xbox, but then sending that itself. It's doing the decoding. It's converting it into something that regular ARC can understand and sending that to your AV receiver. That might be where the audio delay is happening, is in the TV.
Right, 'cause it's processing,
Yeah, the TV right now is acting as an audio processor and decoder. It's decoding what's coming out of your Xbox. I bet he set his Xbox to output Atmos. So his TV right now is doing that decoding and then converting it to something regular ARC can pass to his AV receiver. I'm betting that's the actual issue. So turn off eARC in your B9 OLED. That might fix it right there. If it doesn't, oh boy, here we go. If it doesn't, you could use the optical audio output because the optical audio output of the LG OLEDs actually have an audio delay slider that lets you put it into negative numbers where it sends the audio earlier than the video out of optical. It only works with optical. So if turning eARC off doesn't work, which I actually really suspect it will, especially if you set the Series X to output Dolby Digital all the time from the get-go. But if it doesn't, you could switch over to optical, and then you actually do, where he found the audio delay setting. If you're using optical, it lets you go negative on the optical so that the audio comes out earlier. So there you go. So one of those
might be better off just going optical anyways, but I mean, it's not that long. That's not that bad of a cable. I mean, then you can
The TV will still try to decode what's coming out of the Series X and convert it to optical. So the safest thing is set your Series X to just output Dolby Digital.
All right, Dennis. Dennis is running a 5.2.4 configuration. It's in the living room setup that is that's open to his kitchen and dining room plus a spare bedroom. The overall space is roughly 15 by 25 with 12-foot vaulted ceiling. His front, left, and right speakers are a pair of Fluence XL8F towers rated at 87 dB sensitivity and 8 ohm impedance. Mm-hmm. His center is a SVS Ultra sensor, and his surrounds and 4 height speakers are Klipsch. Okay.
Yep.
Plus a pair of SVS PB2000 Pro subwoofers handle the bass duties. I can't even find those in this room.
I don't know where the subwoofers are placed. It's not really the question, so that's okay. But yeah, he's got reference Premiere surrounds and reference series rear heights and front heights, which are a little unevenly mounted, but it makes more sense given his ceiling line and where things are. So yeah.
It's a vaulted ceiling, but he's not going straight down the middle of this vault.
Yeah,
he's off to one side. So he's kind of dealing with what he's dealing with. Mm-hmm. So his main seats are about 11 feet from his front 3 speakers. The whole setup is handled by a Marantz SR6014 receiver, but it's only powering the front 3 speakers at the moment. He uses an older RXV665 Yamaha receiver as just an amplifier to power his Klipsch surround and height speakers. Mm-hmm. He asked us once before about amplification, but now that we have more details about his setup, we'd like to revisit the topic. He can't help but be swayed by the reviews that talk about the greater clarity and separation of details that a dedicated amplifier might deliver from his front 3 speakers. He is eyeing an Emotiva Bassox A3, but would it just be a waste of money? He uses the system for movies, and he honestly never cranks the volume too loud. He likes the idea of improved clarity. That's what he wants. Will a 3-channel amplifier be worth it? So, first of all, DJ, try not to get too drunk. Second, I can't just say no. I can say hell no.
Yeah, this is like no in this
a massive waste of money. In fact,
scenario.
The first thing I would do is I would take the money you're going to spend on this and put them towards some bookshelf SVS Ultra speakers.
There's that, so that you have 3 matching speakers across the front.
Well, it's not just the matching. I think that they're going to sound a lot better. If you're looking for clarity, the clarity is not coming from the amplifier. The clarity is coming from the speakers.
Yes.
So I would get better speakers before I would get... you're only sitting 11 feet away.
Yeah.
And you don't ever turn it that loud.
Yeah.
And you're looking for clarity.
Yeah.
I mean... This is not an amplification issue.
It's not an amplification issue.
Yeah.
Not only that, he's not even using his primary Marantz receiver to power more than 3 speakers. He's only powering 3 speakers from 11 feet away. There's no scenario in which an amplifier is the solution to what you're hoping to achieve here. Now, we want to be clear. We absolutely don't mind the question, because in some scenarios, an amplifier mathematically makes sense. We want to assure you that from 11 feet away with typically, typical to drive speakers, 87 dB efficiency.
Listen to what Andrew said. He bought an $1,800 amplifier and said, they said it's not going to make a difference, but I'm hoping it didn't.
That's right.
He sent it back, and he bought a bunch of other crap. That's
same
what, you just
thing
skip that
here.
middle step.
Just
buy the other crap.
So you do not need an amplifier, but I will say, we have some images of the room. Now, this is clearly a multi-purpose room. It's a living room. It's not a theater that is only a theater and nothing else. But I'm not sure about the acoustics in here. It doesn't look like a room that would be overly reverberant. It's fully carpeted. There's furniture. There's things all over the walls. So he's not dealing with just nothing but hard, flat, reflective surfaces. But he does have this vaulted ceiling, and there are no actual acoustic treatments. And the rear portion of the room, the part that's going into the dining room and kitchen, that's tile floor. So there are some uncontrolled reflections going on in this room. And if you're finding that there's a clarity issue, I would definitely suspect the room's acoustics well before an amplification issue. The problem isn't that you don't have enough amplifier power to play clearer. It's that, in all likelihood, the room acoustics could be improved. Now, could they be improved easily in terms of aesthetics that's going to fit in here that you're not going to see? You can get panels that match the wall colors, or panels that maybe replace some of the decorations on your walls if they're printed panels. They could be accent colors. They could be patterns. There are ways you could certainly make
acoustic treatments. There's just so much stuff on the wall anyway.
There's so much stuff already on the walls, yeah.
Just... how can it possibly be more distracting than everything? And I'm not insulting your room. I'm not.
No.
it's very hard to see these things from pictures, but there's already a lot of stuff in here.
Yeah.
Kind of feels like if you put a little bit more stuff, no one's really going to notice. So,
it seems like the upper sections of your walls, the walls that are pretty close to your ceiling and that, there are spaces up there and that where you could put panels that wouldn't look ridiculous in this room. Maybe they blend right in with the wall color, or maybe they just add a little bit more decoration. But I'm thinking you probably do have some uncontrolled reflections in this room that are potentially contributing to the clarity not being quite where you want it to be. I agree with Tom. I think the money that you would have spent on an amplifier could be better spent on new front left-right speakers.
Well, I can see where he's coming from too, because that Emotiva amp, which by the way is out of stock, so it wasn't like you were buying it anyways. It costs as much as one Ultra bookshelf speaker.
Sure.
So you're looking at that $500 that you were going to spend on this amp, and hoping that you were going to get a clarity improvement, whereas we're going to tell you either spend more money or spend money differently in order to get the clarity that you're looking for, which is in many ways more work. What Rob's suggesting with putting panels up, that's a conversation you need to have with your significant other. Is it going to be moving stuff around, maybe hanging things, maybe moving them, maybe deciding what you do and don't like, all these other things. There's going to be a lot of stuff that goes on with hanging panels that just putting a piece of equipment into the cabinet and changing out some wires, seems a lot easier. We are here to tell you that you will not get the clarity improvement that you're looking for. You won't.
Not just by
something.
Adding the A3, the base XM A3 amplifier. That's not going to do it.
It's not going to do anything. You may convince yourself, at least for the first couple of months, that it is doing something, but eventually you're just going to go, man, it's really not doing anything.
Yeah.
And you will have wasted that time and money. So
but I see a couple of things that potentially might help for no money outlay, which is looking at the center speaker. It doesn't appear to be decoupled, and it doesn't appear to be pulled right to the front of the cabinet that's sitting beneath your TV. That costs you essentially no money. You probably have some mouse pads or something squishy. Some museum putty or blue tack barely costs anything. So having that decoupled from that cabinet below your TV and having it pulled right to the front edge, I don't think it's far back enough that it's actually causing any type of problematic reflection. But nonetheless, you've got a lip in front of the...
Yes.
Yeah, a lip in front of the speaker. So that might help your center speaker just by decoupling it from the cabinet beneath it, because if you're getting added resonance, that can muddy up the dialogue sometimes. And then those 4 height speakers, I think they might be doing more harm than good in this room. I've got to be honest. If you're up mixing everything all the time so that you're utilizing the 4 height speakers that you've mounted, I'm like, in this room, I don't think overhead speakers are a particularly good idea. I have to be honest. I think you might get better clarity by just not using your 4 overhead speakers ever. I think that's a possibility.
You're just breaking hearts over there.
I know.
Rob. You're a heartbreaker, but you are.
But it's simplifying your system.
Trying it out and basically go into your receiver and say, I don't have any height speakers. I only have whatever.
Actually, just changing the listening mode, like put on something that's Dolby True HD or DTS HD Master Audio, and then just make sure the listening mode is the straight decoding mode and not an up mixer, and then apply the up mixer, right? Do a comparison, because that's pretty easy to do back and forth. That is nearly an instantaneous switch.
Right.
and you can compare up mixer versus no up mixer. And I kind of suspect you'll find that not using the up mixer and not having the 4 overhead speakers active will result in clearer sound in this room. I think that might be the case. So we might be simplifying your setup to 5.2.
Sorry in advance. Billy was about it was about a year ago when Billy asked us if he should upgrade his projector. He's got a Sony VW675ES. That's a genuine 4K resolution model that was originally sold for $15,000. It has now been replaced by the VW715ES in Sony's lineup, although there doesn't seem to be much change besides a new processor, and the main reason he is considering upgrading is because he would like HDR to really pop. He's using a 120-inch Seymour AV center stage UF screen, and several HDR movies end up looking too dim with his current Sony. Given all of that, we said that JVC is really the only thing you should consider, since their frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping gives them the edge in HDR performance. But given what he already has, we said it would be best to wait to at least see what, if anything, JVC announces this year. Well, he's getting a bit antsy. A year later, has there been any word from JVC? Do we anticipate new models this year to replace the NX5 and NX7? That's what's giving him an itchy trigger finger is that he has a quote on a good price on an NX7 should he go for it. I don't think JVC has really announced anything much other than like firmware updates in the last
Right.
year.
Yeah.
I can think
There
of.
hasn't been any official announcement, and I wouldn't be surprised either way if there were no new models this year. Wouldn't surprise me. If there were new models this year, it wouldn't surprise me because it's been 3 years. They do typically wait to announce any new models until about Cedia time. So we're talking September, October, November anyway. That's when we would sort of anticipate. I'm still at the same answer. Like, given the projector he has, which is an expensive, good projector, it's really tough for me to say that you should pounce on a JVC right now. I'm still saying I would wait to see if there are any announcements. Because, I mean, if JVC comes out with, I don't know, NX17 and an NX50, and I don't know what the model numbers are going to be, but, you know, if they come out with new models and there's some significant improvement over the NX5 and NX7, which, like I say, are 3 years old at this point, you know, I feel like he's going to be going, I should have waited what we're in July now. We're talking about potentially only waiting till September, October, like 2-3 months.
Yeah,
you
but
know?
he might be missing out on this deal at the same time. So
He might
that's
be
where
missing
it
out
is
on the
coming
deal.
from.
Yeah, I know. But what he has is already such a good projector. Like you could potentially do a bit of tuning to the. I mean, really, it's the gamma. It's the gamma setting that would brighten up the image for those. Because the Sony that he has, it is meant for like 1,000 nit content. And so I don't know if he's already paired it with a Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player. That's one solution, is pair it with a Panasonic player and use the HDR optimizer in the Panasonic player. But of course, that only applies to discs. So if he's streaming service, streaming service should look pretty good on the Sony because the Sony is designed to tone map 1,000 nit content, and that's what the streaming content is. So maybe the solution for you is just a Panasonic player. I think he already had one, though. So I think just adjusting the gamma setting when you're watching HDR, that might be all you need to at least tide you over. It's really tough for me to say that you should pounce on the NX7. Not that I think it would be a bad purchase, but I just get the feeling that if they do announce something in October, he's going to be kicking himself.
Right. I guess the only other thing that came to my mind, other than what you're talking about, like, cause that was going to be my suggestion too. You know, is there something he can do to his projector that might make that HDR pop a little bit more? And like you said, adjusting the gamma or whatever else might do it. But also, how old is your bulb? You know, if this is if you know, you've been living with this for quite a few years, you know, if it's getting towards the end of its lifespan, you might be having a considerably dimmer image than it's capable of doing. So it might be worth it to look into replacing the bulb or replacing whatever the light engine is in there. And if nothing else, it'll be easier to sell it if you decide to go with a
bulb recently replaced.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably going to end up having to do that or cut the price of it. In either way, it's going to end up being the same thing. I don't necessarily
think it is just the bulb probably is dimmer than when it was brand new. That's a given. But I don't necessarily think it is that, though, because he was like, it's several HDR movies, but not all of them. Some of them look okay. So, and it is quite typical for HDR to look, for HDR to look dimmer than SDR. That is quite typical when you just have the single tone mapping curve. Anything that was 4,000 nits or 2,000 nits looks overly dim when that's applied. So that makes sense. But yeah, if you don't already have a Panasonic player, that is the cheap way, because you can go with the UB420. You don't even have to get the 820. You don't have to deal with Dolby Vision. You don't need Dolby Vision.
Yeah. So he says between the NX5 and the NX7, which would you recommend more highly? Lots of people immediately lean towards the NX7 because it boasts a higher contrast number and specs, but is it truly worth $3,000 more? Well, it kind of depends on how much $3,000 is worth to you. If the NX5 is at the end of your budget and you're really pushing to get there, then I'm going to say the NX5 is going to be fine. You're on a 120-inch screen, so you're not as big as, like, I don't ever suggest you go over. I see people online like, I want to get a 150-inch screen.
Sure.
Like, no, you don't. Yeah, you don't.
But Tom, it'll physically fit in their room.
It'll physically fit in my room, yeah. You're going to sit 7 feet away from a 150-inch screen. It's like, what are you, IMAX? You're going to get sick. Stop it. You're going to need Dramamine. So 120 is well within the operating range of either one of these projectors. So you're going to get pretty good performance overall. Now, objectively and in many cases subjectively, the NX7 is better. Is that $3,000 worth it? It depends on. For you, I would say yes. because you're coming from that Sony, which is already a great projector. Would you want that much of a, even any downgrade? Are you looking for any downgrade? Because you might be going in that direction. So, but for people who are, it kind of is a case by case basis. If they're going for the first projector, I think the NX5 is a real good.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only that. Like, if brightness is the number one thing that you notice in HDR, the NX5 actually looks brighter to our eye. Well, in a way, it's measurably brighter because the NX7 has a physical color filter to get you to the full DCI P3, and the NX5 doesn't. Now, the NX5 is still like 90% plus of DCI P3 without any type of filter. So when it goes into HDR mode, it's not giving you full DCI P3. It's giving you like 90%, but it retains all of its available brightness. Whereas when the NX7 goes into HDR mode, it puts the color filter in place. So it gives you 99% of DCI P3. It is wider color than the NX5. That's measurable in there, but that decreases the light output. The NX7 is a little bit brighter than the NX5 without the filter, but once the filter's in place, the NX5 is brighter than the NX7. So it's this weird thing where if you want full wide color, that's your like biggest concern, then the NX7 gives it to you. But like 90% plus is still pretty darn good, and it ends up actually being brighter because there's no color filter. So I think a lot of people sort of sleep on the NX5, and I wouldn't. If you want the maximum color, then yeah, the NX7 is the way to get there. The difference in contrast, like the native contrast of the NX7 is twice the NX5, but that's because there's like a half on the bottom end on the black. So if you have the blackest of the blackest room, you might see a little bit deeper black on the NX7. But if you have like it's a pitch black room, but the walls aren't like matte black, you won't notice the difference anymore. Just the light that'll come off of any type of walls back onto the screen is enough to wash off that tiny difference down at the very, very bottom. So yeah, there's not as big of a gap as you might imagine, and I wouldn't sleep on the NX5. But yeah, it's mostly about the color. If 9% more color makes all the difference, then you got to get the NX7.
There you go. John has an NVIDIA Shield. Time is it? Okay. What he wants is to have a wireless tablet that will always show one of the Shield's music apps so that he can quickly play a track at any moment without having to navigate on the Shield or select everything on the tablet first and then cast to the Shield. Basically, he likes something similar to a PC setup where he could have an extended desktop that goes across his monitor and a wireless second screen. He'd keep his music app on that second screen at all times. Is there a way to do this on the NVIDIA Shield? And furthermore, could the tablet have an ad hoc wireless connection to the Shield so that doesn't all have to go through his Wi-Fi router? I have no clue what this is. This sounds very much like what he wants is a touch panel, like a Crestron sort of thing, where that thing just does the one thing,
just
and
does
that's
music.
all it does.
Yeah.
Which is I don't see any reason why it can't be that way, but he's getting very specific with it can't go through the Wi-Fi router either. So he wants it by Bluetooth. I mean,
ad hoc Wi-Fi. It's a direct Wi-Fi connection between the Shield and this tablet versus going through the router. I'm not 100% sure why, but he wants a direct connection between those two things. Okay, so I mean, the flat answer for, can you do this officially just with apps that are available in the Google App Store? No. All right. Now, I don't think that's really what he was considering. I'm pretty sure he's the type of person who is familiar with rooting his NVIDIA Shield and then side loading apps and that type of thing. So there is an app. It is not an official app. It is something that would be side loaded onto your NVIDIA Shield called Taskbar. Taskbar lets you multitask, so it lets you have more than one app open at a time. It lets you window those apps. It definitely lets you side by side or picture within picture them on the same screen. I don't know about like basically dual screen, right? Like extended desktop mode. I don't know about that. I don't know how to do that on the NVIDIA Shield. I straight up don't know how to do exactly what he wants to do. I know you can, through side loading the Taskbar app, at least multitask, but whether you'd be able to then keep your music streaming app of choice open at all times, but have it only open on your second display, which would be your tablet, while still doing other things on the primary display that is connected via HDMI to the Shield itself. I don't know if that's possible. I've got a thread over on Reddit with some people who are doing this type of thing and talking about the taskbar app and all that. They might be able to help you out, but I don't know exactly how to do this. Now, as it is possible to do ad hoc Wi-Fi connections to the NVIDIA Shield, but I'm not aware of being able to do both at the same time. So how are you going to stream your content? Because that needs an internet connection. Like, how are you going to use the Shield to stream the content while having an ad hoc Wi-Fi connection to just this tablet that's acting as a display? Again, maybe there's a way to sideload an app that lets you do that, but like, as far as I'm aware, you can switch between your ad hoc Wi-Fi and your regular Wi-Fi connection in the Shield. That can be done. That's within the developer tools. In fact, you can do that without even rooting your NVIDIA Shield, but I'm not aware of a way to do them both at the same time. So, I don't know how to do exactly what it is that you want to do. You can at least multitask, though. But I'm kind of like, is clicking the cast button that that awful? Like, you can have a tablet, have whatever music streaming app you want open, start the music playing, and then cast it to your Shield. Like, I know it's not quite instantaneous. He wants to just hit the track and it just plays, but like, it's one extra step. I don't know that it's that bad. And then you're not dealing with all of this side-loading stuff, which can get a little bit flaky sometimes. Yeah, that's the best I've got. I don't have the full answer. I'm sorry.
All right. So he says, when Tom, meaning me, is reading out the questions on the podcast, why is he saying something different versus the exact words of the original email? I will tell you right now, because if we read your exact words, not yours, but other people's exact words, this would be a very confusing podcast.
Well, I mean, like, I don't want to point any fingers. I'm not doing this to shame John or anything like that, but John's emails come in. Now, he uses line breaks to separate his sentences, but he has not used any punctuation in any of his emails. There are no commas or periods. And so,
right.
And I've had emails from other people that come in with not even line breaks. It is all
just
one
big
sentence.
Paragraph. Yeah, it's one big sentence.
Yeah,
no compilation, no anything. Yeah.
So he says, because John's a relatively new listener, so let him know what's going on behind the scenes a bit. I write all the show notes. So those are my words that Tom is reading when reading the question. I am editorializing, I am editing, and I am rewriting all the questions. So it is both of us who are a part of this. It's not as though Tom is looking at the original emails while we're doing the podcast, and Tom is not editorializing and editing as he goes. So we're both in on it.
So he's saying some things are left out, some things are added, and it's never verbatim. For example, last episode we gave the wrong dimensions for the acoustic panels that John wants to make. He doesn't want them to be 2.5 by 5.5 with the fabric wrapped around the outside of the frame and stapled on the back, which is what we said, but not what he wrote. He wants the fabric to be 38 inches by 74 inches, and then he wants the insulation to be 36 by 72. He will just cover the front face of the insulation with fabric and then staple 1 extra inch on all sides to the inside of the frame. So is it that things are being misread? What's the deal? What's the deal is that we got... Okay, there's a lot of things. Like Rob said, he is turning your emails into something I can read. Then as I read them, sometimes I change them into things that make sense to me.
Sure.
Because I have to say it in a way that I understand, or you won't understand. If I just read it verbatim, and you've heard me do this on this podcast before, where I've read something to verbatim, it's clear I do not understand what I'm reading. And then I say I don't understand what I'm reading, and then we have to go back through it, because if I don't understand it, you won't understand it.
Sure.
And to the point here, you have a very specific, like 2.5 by 5.5.
And I mean,
versus 38 by 74.
I made an assumption. Like, the thing was, it was clear in John's mind. He knows what he's building, and he was describing it. And when he said, I want 1 extra inch of fabric so that I can staple it to the frame, I made the assumption that this was the regular type of panel that a lot of people make DIY, which is the fabric goes around the outside of the frame, and the 1 extra inch was going to be stapled on the back. I made that assumption, and yes, it was an assumption. But, like, specifically to John, it wasn't described the way he described it in this clarification email. This was very clear. When he said it in this new one, he's like, yeah, the fabric is only 1 extra inch on all sides and it gets stapled to the inside of the frame. He didn't John, I don't know if recalls, but you didn't actually write that in the first email. So yes, I did make an assumption, which was incorrect. And then Tom read the words that I had, written down because of the assumption. But if Tom had just read verbatim the exact email that came in directly from John, we still would have been confused. We still probably would have made the exact same assumption that we made last time, because what was actually written in the original email didn't say exactly this, where it's just the 1 extra inch around the insulation. So, but
99% of the time, it really doesn't matter. Whether or not we're talking about the inside or outside of stapling things or any of that other stuff, or whether or not we got your dimensions exactly correct, the device is not going to change most of the time.
In the end, he was asking about which acoustically transparent fabric to buy, and the dimensions of it don't really matter.
Yeah, it gives a crap what size. It could be 1,000 feet by 1,000 feet. We don't care.
It's coming back to the curiosity of, essentially, why don't we just read the emails, right? Which, frankly, if we could do, would that be easier for time management on my end? That would be a lot easier. But I think it's because for example, there's some other shows, particularly like what Shane does on his Spare Change channel on YouTube. He has live things where he just takes questions that come in on the fly and he just reads, verbatim what was written to him, because that's coming in on the fly, and then he responds to it. And that's great. That's a great show that he does, and he provides a wonderful service. For our podcast, because this is a podcast, I know we show up on YouTube, but that's because we're on Skype and we might as well record our video because we're going to be talking to each other on Skype anyway. But that's really all it is. We're not really making a YouTube show. We're making a podcast. And
this is not the most exciting YouTube show. Some would say it's not the most exciting podcast either. So there's a lot of things going wrong over here.
Yeah, but there's two faces you probably don't want to stare at the whole time. And that's really all our YouTube show is. So, what it boils down to ultimately, and again, for people who are new to this podcast and new to listening, I do like going over this again once in a while, which is that the reason I like doing this podcast is because I want to make the show that I want to listen to. That's really what it boils down to. I want to give the advice that I would want to receive if I were the one asking the questions, and I want to make the podcast that I would enjoy listening to. And when I listen to podcasts where they do just read the emails verbatim, and sometimes that means they're stumbling over the words or the punctuation, and they spend time trying to understand what the question is, and then they give an answer, and there's still some back and forth. Like when Shane does it, he has to do back and forth because it's live and people aren't putting in all the information in the live chat, and you have to go I don't always enjoy listening to that just as a listener. I think it's a great service. I have zero beef with the people who do their show that way, but just listening to a weekly podcast, I prefer one that's a little bit more curated and a little bit more put together, and there aren't the big pauses and the confusion and the ums and the back and forth. And so it's a compromise. I'm making the show I would want to listen to. So that's really the answer.
I'll double down on this. We have toyed with the idea of occasionally having a call-in show. And I've talked about it, and this is before Rob. I've talked about this with Clint when we first started, Dina back in the day, and I will tell you the number one thing that'll get me to turn a radio station to a different radio station or just turn the radio off completely is to have some caller call in and say and 1,000 times trying to kind of muddle their way through a question. It drives me absolutely bonkers. So like Rob's saying, he wants a more curated show where the questions are easier to understand. And if that doesn't exactly translate your question, verbatim, well then, it's okay. It's free service.
We've had other people ask a very similar question in the past because they're saying, okay, I wrote it. Why don't you just read it verbatim? Wouldn't that be easier for you if nothing else? And it absolutely would. But yeah, it's wanting to have it flow.
The other thing that you guys all have to understand as well is that Rob's not just writing it so that it makes sense. He has to write it so that it makes sense. He has to write it in my voice, basically. He has to write it so that he knows it'll sound right coming out of my mouth because I'm the one that's reading all the questions. And he does a really good job at that. He does a really good job where he'll actually put the punctuation where he knows I'm going to pause anyways. And he puts
we have enough experience at this point that I can predict it. But still, like Tom mentioned, when we started answering this question, sometimes he still changes things on the fly because writing things in text doesn't sound exactly the same as when it comes out of your mouth and the order of words and all that stuff. That's just part of script writing and reading off a teleprompter, which is essentially what's going on.
He'll put words like "well" and then comma at the very end of the sentence, or "right" or something like that, because he knows that's what I'm going to say. So it makes it a lot easier for me. So he's not only translating it from whatever you wrote to whatever he thinks is understandable, but he's also then translating that again into my voice. So there's a lot of steps going on here. Now, if you can write it in my voice in a way that I'll understand, he will love to copy paste that stuff. But the reality is that most of the stuff comes in, and like Rob said, we've also had people who have disabilities, and they'll voice to text things. And it comes in stream of consciousness, and we're just like, okay, and we're happy to have the questions. I'm not asking people ever to feel like they can't ask a question because they're not,
and ask it in their voice, but in order to produce it on the show, like I definitely, I reorder the questions versus what the order was in the email, because I have a pretty good guess at what the answer is going to be, and I try to order the questions so that one will kind of naturally flow into the next question. Like, I completely reordered one of the earlier questions. I did it back to front because in terms of answering it made more sense in my head
that's Infinite Gary, because Infinite Gary's question was like lined up perfectly, right? So that didn't come in that way. It just so happened that Rob reorganized it, and sometimes he puts questions together.
I also want to have the questions so that it is applicable to more than just literally one person. I do try to broaden it somewhat, and I will add things that the person didn't even ask. That is a complete editorialized add to me, but it's because by having the additional question that the person didn't even ask, it leads us to the answer that I'm anticipating they want. So absolutely there's a lot of editorializing going on. It's because we're not like, yes, we say we're a question and answer podcast, but it's not strict this for this person and this person only. We're trying to make a podcast. So it's a wider audience.
We're trying to not only answer questions, but teach. If you will. So, all right, let's go on. Bob in the Philippines. Bob currently has an iMac that's a little bit older. He is able to use its USB-A output to send audio directly to his desktop speakers, but the iMac also has an analog headphone jack, and thankfully that remains active at all times. So while his desktop Vanatu speakers are getting USB audio, he can simultaneously use the headphone jack to send an analog stereo signal to his Denon receiver. That way he can use his iMac as an audio source for his main speakers, and he can also send that audio to his Denon Zone 2 output for a pair of speakers in the kitchen. Wow, that's a long way to get there, isn't it? So it's from the headphone output to the Denon, from the Denon to Zone 2.
Yeah.
And then out. Okay. But he can't be sure a new computer will still work this way. In fact, he's eyeing a model that appears to only have Thunderbolt connections as far as USB goes. And it does appear to still have a headphone jack, but he can't be sure it's still active at all times if he were to select one of those Thunderbolt ports as his audio output device. So, what if he just connected the headphone jack to a Y splitter? His Vanatu desktop speakers do have a stereo analog input. Would that work? Would it degrade the audio signal? I mean, that should work.
That should work for everything he wants to do. It's a single audio output from the computer.
Yeah. The thing I would worry about is noise floor, which can sometimes be very bad coming through
a computer's headphone jack. Yeah.
But you can solve that by getting an outboard USB DAC, like a real cheap one. It doesn't have to be a super expensive one. Just one that is a USB, the little dongle with a headphone output, and then split it from there.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be specifically labeled as Thunderbolt, because anything that is Thunderbolt will work with USB-C. And if it's just a USB-C dongle, like headphone output, that'll definitely work on Thunderbolt. So that's not an issue.
Yeah. So I feel like this is like the solution that you're looking for, no matter what.
I mean, the headphone jack might be okay. Some computers, the headphone jack is okay, but sometimes it isn't. Yeah. But either way, the basic idea of having, whether it's directly through the computer's headphone jack or from a USB dongle on your computer that creates a headphone jack or a line out, having analog then split via a Y splitter to feed your Vanatu desktop speakers and your Denon, that will work. right? Once you have a clean analog stereo signal,
Right.
splitting it with a Y splitter is no problem. That's not going to degrade the audio
No.
signal from that point. And then, this will absolutely work being all analog. So I think that's the safer way to go. I mean, of course, you could try it once you have the new computer. Maybe it works exactly the way that your current computer does, and there's no changes at all necessary. Possible.
But you're right. I mean, it is the way that you know that going forward, it will always work.
Yeah.
And buying a little USB dongle, that outboard DAC, make sure that you don't have that noise floor issue.
Yeah.
You can turn the volume up, whatever the volume control is on it, to make sure that it's loud but not so loud that it introduces any more noise.
Yeah.
And then you can control the volume from your other device.
Yeah.
Michael asks, what do you do when your primary seat is no longer perfectly centered? It's no longer your primary seat.
Yeah, well.
Depending on how your couch works. The seating in Michael's living room has been rearranged. It's better for visiting and family togetherness, but it means his seat is over to the right when he's facing his TV and front speakers now. And the thing that's maybe bothering him the most is that the right surround speaker is too noticeable for him as well. Another big downside, though, is that he used to have a luxurious, perfect balance from all his speakers, especially the stereo imaging, back when his primary seat was perfectly centered. So he's heard us say that even if you don't physically have a seat smack dab in front of the TV and center speaker, you should still put your Odyssey microphone right where the perfect seat would go for measurement number 1. Well, he's tried that and it sounds okay, but as mentioned, his right surround speaker is too loud when he's in his new primary seat over to the right, and the stereo imaging just isn't as good. So should he rerun Odyssey, but this time keep the microphone close to his new primary seating location the whole time? And what can be done to get him closer to the experience he used to have? Well, don't sit in that seat anymore. Sit to the left where you're now sitting.
I don't know that there actually is a seat
there.
The
so therein lies the problem.
Yes.
So, okay, I have actually recently experienced a little bit of a similar thing, and it happened after I tested the Atlantic Technology AT3 speakers. So I had moved my speakers in here in a bajillion years, but then I moved them so that I could do these tests with these tower speakers. And I set the tower speakers back, everything was fine. But I noticed that I was getting a bit of separation as things were like if a sound was more primarily in a left or right speaker, I was noticing that it wasn't blending perfect. There wasn't. It seemed like it was too much in that side speaker.
Okay.
So it would, the person would move from the right side of the stage to the left to the center of the stage, and there would be they would hop from speaker to speaker. So in my case, what I ended up having to do was just kind of adjust the angle of the toe in, just slightly, just toe them in a little bit more, and that gave me a more unified front sound stage. So in your case, what's your problem? Well, my couch is a couch. It's a normal couch but it does recline. All the 3 massive seats can fit. We can fit all 5 of us on that couch. But it's 3 massive seats, and they all reclined individually. But there's no arms in between them, so you kind of sit anywhere. So the primary seat is right on the crack. There's a crack between 2 seats, and that's the primary seat. You're going to have a bit of your left butt cheek on it if you sit in the center of where the primary seat would be. So when I'm sitting by myself, that's where I sit. But when I'm not sitting there by myself, I'm sitting in another place. And that's when I started noticing the stuff that I just described. So in your case, what I would do, first of all, I think you should still put the Odyssey microphone where it's supposed to be. Okay. Because we're talking about for acoustics in your room and getting your room as balanced as possible. I know... depending on what receiver you have, and if you can save multiple settings, I would do that. Leave it there, and then try a separate one where it was centered on your where you sit. But just remember, if you're having this problem, everybody else is having this problem as well. So what you'll end up doing is whoever's sitting down on the left of the couch, they're going to get way too much of the left surround speaker.
Yeah.
So because it's going to increase that volume and decrease the volume of the right one because you've moved the microphone over to the right side of your couch, or your seating area at least. So you're going to end up just transferring the problem to somebody else. Maybe you don't care. I don't know. But I would still do the main microphone position at where it's supposed to be. And if you have the ability to have a second measurement and saved with the Odyssey Editor app, go ahead and do that just so you can A/B it. But I would adjust your front. If your front problem, I guess the right speaker is the big issue, right?
Well, I mean, the surround right speaker is his biggest problem because he's physically sitting quite a bit closer to it than he used to. So that one is just kind of sticking out like a sore thumb to him. But his stereo imaging isn't as good as it used to be, and of course it isn't. You're not sitting centered anymore, so that makes sense.
So I would adjust for the front of the speaker, the front speakers. I would adjust, if you can, how wide they are, and then what their toe-in is, to help kind of get you back into within their cone of adequate timbre response. And as far as the right speaker, just turn it down, man. Just turn it down.
The right surround speaker. Yeah.
I mean, just turn it down. I mean,
anybody else probably isn't going to notice that
nobody's
it's
gonna care about
quieter
you.
than it really technically should be.
Just turn it down. Just go into the trim level and say, oh, you're at +5. You're now at -2.
Yeah.
And
that can be done after the fact manually without affecting Odyssey negatively in any way, just adjusting the trim level of your surround right speaker. Yeah, I mean, so I'm not too concerned about the surround right speaker because, yes, exactly, just turn the trim level down. To me, it's the importance of the stereo imaging if you are using this to listen to music, and now your seat is to the right. It's shifted to the right. My big question is, how much change can you make to the entire front soundstage, perhaps even television included? But I'm talking your front, left, and right main speakers, and possibly even your center speaker as well. Because, like, if you are truly the only person who cares, like really cares in this room, right now, by making microphone position number 1, where a theoretical perfect seat would be, directly in front of the center speaker, directly equidistant between your front, left, and right. We're doing that if this is an audience room. We're doing that if you do care about other seats. If you truly only care about the one seat that you sit in, how much can you adjust the physical positioning of the speakers up front to more directly align with your current seat without it maybe looking weird? Because maybe that means everything is at a cockeyed angle if you actually align to everything perfectly, and that would just look too weird to actually use. Maybe even adjusting the toe in so that it works better for that one seat would have one speaker so cockeyed that someone's going to walk in and go, what the heck? Why is one speaker facing that way? If they even notice. Who knows about other people? But if you truly only care about that one seat, you could make physical changes to your front, left, and right speakers. And then, yes, you could move microphone position number 1. I like Tom's idea of using the Odyssey Editor app so that you can save and load 2 different configurations and try it back and forth without destroying the configuration you currently have in case you want to go back to it.
What he's going to end up doing is just turn that speaker down and then just remembering where it was. And then if he's not the one that's sitting there, if there's, he wants it to be more, the way it's supposed to be, he could just turn it back up again.
But if you can effectively set up and calibrate this room as though your seat is the only seat, then it becomes okay to make that microphone position number 1 now. If truly nowhere else in this room matters one iota, then yes, you can do it that way. And like I say, you can even physically
we all
position
say that, but then somebody starts complaining that they're
if anybody complains, though, then that's the reason why we're saying mic position number 1 might not be where a seat even exists, but that is when we're talking about the audience, the entire room being something we care about.
Yeah. Kevin has a Sony X900E TV. It's a full array local dimming and supports HDR10. No Dolby Vision, though. He was using his PS5 to play some Ultra HD Blu-ray disc. He ran into a glitch with one disc that kept crashing, so he switched over to a Sony X700 Ultra HD Blu-ray player, and the problem disc played fine on that. He isn't sure why the PS5 had trouble playing that particular disc, but his actual question is a bit different. He was able to watch part of the disc on his PS5 before it crashed, and when he switched to his X700 player, it played the whole movie, which is obviously much better. Unless
preferable.
The movie sucked, in which case you're like, thank you for not making me watch this whole thing. Right. But the movie didn't seem to look as good as when he saw it playing on his PS5. So is the PS5 a better Blu-ray player than the X700? It's a Ultra HD?
Ultra HD.
Ultra HD.
Yes.
So, I mean, it could be that you've got some settings differences between the two. That's making a difference.
We can answer directly no. It's not as though the PlayStation 5 is some, like, it just plays Ultra HD Blu-rays better than the X700. It's not that kind of difference. If you did see a difference, and you might have, this is a setting. And I'm suspecting, like, maybe are you using the same HDMI input for both sources? Like if these are plugged directly into the television, then if the PlayStation 5 was plugged into HDMI 1 on the TV and the X700 is plugged into HDMI 2 on the TV, were you even in the same picture mode for both HDMI inputs? You know, it might have been a picture setting, a picture mode setting on the television that was changed, and that would easily be noticeable and be different. So, this is definitely a picture setting of some kind. There are settings within the players as well. For what they end up sending out. But yeah, this is definitely a settings change. If you were seeing that difference, it's not that one is just an inherently better player. As far as the PlayStation 5 even having this glitch while playing back the disc, do you have it standing vertical? Because it does not like to read discs when it's standing vertical. It really wants to be horizontal when it's reading discs.
It's so dumb. It's so dumb. But I now that you say it, I'm like, yeah, that makes perfect sense, actually.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. And I know all of the heat and fan design was for it to be standing vertical, but when it's a disc player, it likes the discs to be horizontal and flat.
That's so
and not standing up
it's
and down.
so stupid, but also so true. I mean, it just makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That's.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say I've never run into a disc that didn't want to play on one player but played perfectly on another. That has happened. You know,
and I mean, like the Oppo players famously would play discs that nobody else would play.
Right.
And that was great. That's part of why we love them.
Well, and you know how sensitive the laser is, or whatever the tracking that they have on there. Some of them are just a little bit more robust, or have more overscan, or something. I don't know, but that could happen. But
larger
the fact
buffer size.
Yeah, the fact that it's standing up and it just misaligns it a little bit as it gets closer and closer to the center of the disc.
It's noticeably noisier spinning that disc vertically than it is spinning the disc horizontally.
The hamster's upside down. He's going like this. Fred says his in-laws are shopping for a new TV. They honestly don't care. Just get them the cheapest piece of junk. They don't care.
They do care about one thing for real, and that's what the question is about.
So 55 inches would be the perfect size, which means it's far too small and they're sitting too far away, but it's 5 inches bigger than the last one they had, so it's the perfect size.
Yeah.
The proposed budget is $700, although that can go up a little if it's super worthwhile. A big concern, though, is audio and dialogue. In particular, Fred's father-in-law has hearing aids now, so that's a big consideration. Fred was hoping there might be a TV and soundbar combo that will fit their budget, but in addition to wanting very clear dialogue, which means that they should put a panel behind their heads, but they absolutely won't do that. They don't want to have to use more than one remote. They won't have any external sources. They've started using Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and YouTube TV, so the apps within the TV should work. Finally, Fred's father-in-law was able to pair his new hearing aids with his iPhone, and that works very well for him. He was advised that a similar connection would be offered for his TV via a Bluetooth connection. So Fred started looking at Bluetooth transmitters on Amazon. The budget for that would be separate from the TV and soundbar. Given the price point, Fred immediately thought of TCL, and they do offer a 3.1 TCL Alto soundbar that's only $250. But what do we recommend? So more TVs these days. In fact, I really feel like I think Atlanta Technology just released a soundbar recently too that I remember specifically had Bluetooth for this exact purpose. More TVs these days and soundbars are having Bluetooth that they can send out audio separately so that you can do this.
You need to be a bit careful though, because my father and a couple of my aunts, they all use hearing aids, and while it is Bluetooth technology that is pairing the hearing aids to, say, your phone, it is a proprietary Bluetooth. Like Bluetooth is the underlying technology, but it isn't just standard Bluetooth. Like you don't just do a standard Bluetooth pairing, you do the hearing aid version of the pairing to your phone or the other device. And most often, whatever brand of hearing aids that your father-in-law has now, they usually have their own little wireless adapter box that is meant to get its audio signal from the audio output of your television, and then it sends the wireless signal directly to his hearing aids. That absolutely will work. I don't think I've come across any modern hearing aids that don't have that as an option, but it isn't just standard Bluetooth pairing. So if you were looking at like a Bluetooth transmitter for headphones on Amazon, that isn't necessarily going to work with his hearing aids, because the pairing process is usually proprietary. It doesn't need to be, but they do it so they can charge you more money, and it absolutely is a racket in the hearing aids. It is kind of disgusting how much they charge for very, normal technology, but they lock it in for the pairing process. So got to be a little bit careful on that front. That also makes me think you do specifically want to look for a television that still has I would preferably like to have both an optical and just a regular stereo analog audio output, because a lot of them are eliminating that now. A lot of televisions are eliminating the standard optical and analog stereo audio outputs because they're just relying on HDMI ARC now. And a lot of the headphone, or rather hearing aid wireless transmitters don't use HDMI ARC. They use optical or they use stereo analog, a lot of them. So that's a thing to look for on the television.
I feel like, though, if he got it hooked up to his iPhone, that it should be able to use a more normal Bluetooth solution, but maybe not.
Well, no, because iPhones have the hearing aid specific.
Oh, they
thing.
do.
They definitely do. That's one of the things they support specifically.
Would it be worth it then just to get headphones for him, rather than, you know what I mean, so that he could connect to a regular Bluetooth transmitter and then use those headphones? I mean,
but they do have the wireless transmitters for hearing aids, like and the headphone Bluetooth
I'm just thinking
transmitter.
about cost-wise.
Oh, yeah, cost-wise. But, I mean, if he's able to get some of this hearing aid stuff through insurance or something like that, then that's going to be part of it. And they love to sell that little wireless adapter for the television. So that's just to be strictly on the hearing aid side of it. Now, as for which television and potentially soundbar they could get, that TCL soundbar is garbage. It's absolute garbage. It does not sound good. It is not worth your $250 to get the TCL soundbar. Now, their televisions, the built-in speakers, also sound like garbage. So I'm not keen on going all TCL. Furthermore, Roku is in a big dispute with YouTube TV right now. They won't even let you put the YouTube TV app on anything Roku right now. YouTube did a fun little workaround where they're like, well, you're not going to get rid of the regular YouTube app, are you? So they just snuck YouTube TV into the regular YouTube app. But Roku's in a dispute with them, and they're suing Google over doing that. So going something that relies on Roku, maybe not the best choice right now. And then sound-wise, I wouldn't go TCL at all. I think, given that they want simplicity and the dialogue clarity is like the number one thing, I'm kind of tempted to just say get a Sony TV and stop. You don't get a soundbar. You definitely only have one remote at that time. The current Sony TVs all use... Well, it's Android TV with the new Google TV interface. That definitely works with YouTube TV and definitely has Netflix and Amazon Prime Video available. And the Google TV interface is really quite nice and easy to use. If you get one of the better Sony televisions, they're about the only TV maker that's cares about the built-in sound at all. And they're pretty decent without needing to add a soundbar. Now, price, that's the issue, because the ones I would point you to would either be last year's X900H or this year's, and to actually get even remotely close to the price, I'm going down one model tier to the X85J. There is an X90J that directly replaces the X900H, but that's definitely $1,200 or $1,300 for the 55-inch size. The X85J, which you can absolutely get right now, is $1,000 for the 55-inch size. That's $300 more than they were looking to spend. But sometimes when you're talking about in-laws, they're like, oh, a Sony, that makes sense. They're willing to pay a bit more. So that might be enough to convince them. You can still find X900Hs out there some places. Best Buy right now, they've got open box models for $850. And Best Buy open box is usually pretty okay. They actually do inspect their stuff before they sell it on. $850 to me is worth it to get an X900H, because its built-in speakers are actually better than the majority of soundbars that are out there, legitimately, that they actually put some care into the built-in speakers. So I think I would probably just do that. And then the Sonys have both optical and stereo analog outputs still available on them. So if you are connecting it to that wireless transmitter for the hearing aids, that'll definitely work on a Sony. So that's where I would point you. It might not be exactly what you were thinking, but that's where I would go.
All right, then. And it looks like that's it.
That's
you
it.
Just got this.
That's all the questions. I threw in a thing that I could carry on because we haven't gone to. You need to go, but
I have to go.
I could carry on with this because this was all going to be me talking anyway. If we want to fill out 2 hours,
it's up to you.
Sure, why not? It's fun. People love hearing a rant about stuff, so this is definitely a rant.
All right. If you want to get your question answered on this podcast, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. So Rob's going to continue going on. He'll mention the listeners of the week at the end of the podcast.
I sure will.
I am going to go start to seal up my house with sandbags and tarps, and I will see you guys next week.
Alrighty. Bye for now, Tom, and we'll see you next week. So here I go carrying on with my experience looking for some gaming headset. That's what I'm looking for. So not just headphones, something that has a microphone built in. And I realize there are some pretty darn good add-on microphones, but you end up with more than one cable attached to things and that. I just wanted a headset. I'm like, surely gaming is a huge industry now. Surely there are plenty of really good gaming headsets out there. There must be. And I went on a search. So I'll just say it up front. It sure seems like anything that is marketed towards gamers is overpriced crap. That's my initial takeaway, is that I was tremendously disappointed and really quite frustrated and angry that there's a lot of reviews, there's a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of people saying that some of these headsets they think are pretty decent. I don't understand it. I don't understand how they find these headsets acceptable, let alone good. And so I'm going to go through some of these that are some pretty darn popular models and give you some pretty quick thoughts on them. I don't physically have them here with me anymore. I returned them because I was using the same budget over and over. And yes, unfortunately, it did mean I was buying and returning quite a few products. But I did ultimately buy something and kept it. So that is teasing for the end. I'll let you know what I have that I found satisfactory. So starting off, I'm just going to do these sort of in alphabetical order, unless it just makes sense to compare two things directly. Astro Gaming, I actually previously already had some Astro A50s, the old version, not the current version. So I started with this, and I was looking to keep the budget somewhere between 150 and 250 Canadian dollars. So I'm converting the prices to what's available in the United States, because most of our listeners are in the US, but the Astro A40 TR headset goes for 150 US dollars. It is wired, so this would mean I'm plugging a wire into my Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5 controller, because those just have a headphone and microphone jack. It's the 4-pole TRRS connection that's got 4 wires in there. So that's your stereo, analog, ground, and the microphone signal all being sent through a single 3.5 millimeter connection. So the Astro A40s are wired. I would plug them directly into the controllers to do my sound and microphone that way. So $150, I was expecting more from Astro. The sound was dark and muffled, and I'm borrowing ratings measurements, because they've measured pretty much all the headsets that I tried. Now, looking at the frequency response that they measured, it is tipped down in the treble. It is got a little bit of a boost in sort of the upper bass and the lower mid-range. Just looking at the frequency response they measured, I wouldn't expect them to sound as poor as they sounded to my ears. I didn't think that the Astro A40s were worth the money at all. They sounded dark and muffled to me. The microphone was bad. They've kept the same mic for over a decade now, and they've just never improved that thing. It's unacceptable at this point. I also think they're big and heavy, and I absolutely would not recommend them. And yet they're one of the more highly touted models out there. So the Astro A50s, I didn't bring these in. I didn't audition them because they're $300 US. It was well above the budget that I wanted to consider. I did not test those. Those are wireless, although They won't work with both a PlayStation and an Xbox. You kind of have to get the specific version, which is an extra ripoff. There's no reason why with a base station they shouldn't be able to work with both platforms. It's kind of ridiculous. But looking at the frequency response that Ratings measured on the Astro A50s, maybe those are better. They are much more linear in their frequency response. What Ratings is doing, by the way, in their measurements, just to let people know, is they are using the Harman headphone curve, because of course what we hear inside of our eardrums is not a perfectly flat line, so they are using the headphone curve, and then they're translating that so that the target is a flat linear line, and then we're just seeing the offset from that that the headphones are measuring. So the Astro A50s measure well. Maybe they sound better. I did not actually hear those, but I think it's ridiculous that you can only use them on one system or the other and have to get the specific version. So moving on, I tried out the Corsair Virtuoso RGB because, of course, it's gaming and they have to have RGB that lights up. Okay, so $160. These are wireless. You do have to use a wire for the Xbox. They're wireless for PS5 or for a PC, but you have to plug them into the Xbox controller because they don't work on the same wireless signal that Xbox does. But the microphone on these is the best by a country mile. That is wonderful. They also have the worst sound out of all of them that I tried. And looking at the measurements that Ratings had, kind of not surprising. It is the squiggliest line. I don't know if they picked one specific game and wanted to make certain things sound out, way more than others. I don't know what they're doing with these the tuning on these headphones. They sound like absolute garbage. They are also the least comfortable headphones by far of all the ones that I tried. They physically rub against your ears, so they become physically painful if you wear them for more than about 20 minutes. I don't know what they're doing with these headphones. I don't know why anybody would ever recommend them. So then HyperX. Okay, HyperX, popular, not too expensive, seemed to be pretty decent. I tried the Cloud X Flight, $130. These are specific for the Xbox, which is the one I kind of cared more about having a headset for. There is the regular Cloud Flight that you can use for the PlayStation, but you can't cross-pollinate them. It's specific again, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. However, with the Cloud Flight for the PlayStation, you can use a wire to connect it to the Xbox controller. So the Cloud X Flight is the worst deal. The regular Cloud Flight would be the better deal. I will say that as far as wireless headsets go, these were the least worst. And again, looking at the frequency response, at least it's somewhat linear. I didn't think they were good. And there was some mismatching between the two ears, which even Ratings picked up in the one that they measured. They're like, yeah, the stereo imaging isn't perfect on these because there's a bit of a mismatch between the left and the right ear. I don't know if that's just the price point. $130 isn't cheap. I don't get it. But as far as like just playing sweeps and music and not having it sound like absolute garbage, these were the least worst. So if somebody bought the HyperX Cloud Flight, I would say, okay, that's okay. The microphone, though, is bad. It's just bad. What's the excuse? So Logitech. How's Logitech doing in the gaming headset realm? I tried out the G Pro X, also $130. These ones are wired. They're not wireless whatsoever. The microphone is meh. It's okay. It's not terrible. It's not good. These ones got hot real quick. They were the worst on that front, and they were the only ones I tried that had a cupped sound to them, as though I had put my hands around my mouth and was delivering a cupped sound to you. The raw frequency response as measured by Ratings isn't too bad, but they had a cupped sound. Unacceptable. Why? Doesn't make sense. The official Xbox wireless headset, $100, can only be used with the Xbox, cannot be used with the PlayStation whatsoever. Bass. It's all it plays. All it plays is bass. It's all it's got. The measurement is ridiculous. Terrible. Unacceptable. How can anybody use that? And here, I'm not alphabetical anymore, but I did try out the PlayStation Pulse 3D, the official wireless headphones for the PlayStation 5. Ironically, you can use them with a wire with the Xbox, so you could use these connected to an Xbox controller. The microphone is terrible. It is the worst of all the microphones that I tried. Also, the plastic creaks. Physically creaks while you're wearing it on your head, and you move even slightly. It creaks. What is up with that? It's ridiculous. These were also too small for my apparently giant elephant ears. These became partial on ears instead of over ears. So they were not super comfortable for me. If you got small ears, they might be okay. The frequency response measured all right. They don't have any treble to speak of, but they don't have the completely overblown bass of the Xbox wireless headset. $100 each. I wouldn't go for either of the official headsets. The Pulse 3D, not good. So Razer. What has Razer got to offer? I tried the Kyra Pro, $120. These are Xbox only. They won't work on the PlayStation at all. They got a good mic. They also have a ridiculous V-shaped frequency response. It's like crazy amount of 8 and 10 kilohertz just blasting your ears off. Overblown bass, V-shaped is all a get out. Why would anybody use these? I don't know. So SteelSeries, I was really hopeful with SteelSeries. They're at the top of a lot of recommended lists. The Arctis 7X for $150 is the only wireless headset that anybody offers that will work with both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox. It's got a little switch on the wireless dongle that you just plug into a USB port for Xbox mode or PlayStation/PC mode. Why can nobody else do this? Their SteelSeries is the only one, but only on the 7X. I had really high hopes for it because the feature set would let it work on both of them. Unfortunately, sound and microphone-wise, middling is the word I would use. They are middling performers in sound quality and on the microphone. I found them fatiguing, and looking at the frequency response, not super surprising that I found them fatiguing. They're fairly V-shaped. The 4 kilohertz and up is just boosted like crazy. I guess that's to let you hear footsteps or something in the game, the click of somebody else's gun. I guess that's what they're doing, is trying to boost that stuff up, but they're just fatiguing. Also, the pair that I got had mismatched left and right ears. The stereo imaging was pulled over to the right. The quality control was not good. Very, very disappointed in those. So there are the Arctis 9X. Those are $200. They are Xbox only. For some reason, they can't include the same dongle to also let them work with a PlayStation. These connect directly to the Xbox with its wireless protocol. Looking at the frequency response, maybe these are better. These have one of the most linear, accurate frequency responses that ratings measured was on the SteelSeries Arctis 9X. But I did not try those ones after such disappointed with the 7X. And these ones are Xbox only. Why? Why are things like this? They're just trying to rip gamers off, as far as I can tell. So Turtle Beach. Lots of people talk about Turtle Beach. I tried the Stealth 700 Generation 2, $150. They are wireless, but there are specific versions for PlayStation or Xbox. You gotta get the specific version. These have the worst V-shaped sound that I tried. The measurement doesn't necessarily show the worst, but yeah, the huge tipped up treble, huge tipped up bass. They were even worse than the Razers to my ears. They seem to really go for this V-shaped response for gamers, and I just... Okay, so I've heard gamers in reviews, they talk about, okay, I don't want accurate sound. I want an advantage in competitive games. I want to hear the click of footsteps and a gun being cocked and stuff. I want that to really stand out prominently so that I get an advantage in games. Okay, I understand some of that. Maybe that's why the V-shaped response appeals to some people. But like, you've heard real life, right? Do these headphones sound anything like real life? I've seen so many reviews saying, yeah, I would never use these for music. They sound terrible for music, but for games, they're okay. I'm like, how? How is that? They're okay for sound, but not for sound. That's one of my favorite lines. It doesn't make sense to me. They should sound good for music. Any headset should sound good for music. It should sound good for sound. It should sound like, if you play a recording of real life, it should still sound like real life. I don't get it. I'm very confused. I don't understand how these things are acceptable for games, but nothing else. Games are sounds. Should sound like real life. So, okay. I came back around to Sennheiser. That's where I came back around. Sennheiser has a set that they market towards gamers. The Game 1. Sennheiser Game 1 headset. Now, these are also sold from Drop as the PC37X. They're the same. I know that Drop says they tuned something or changed something. It's the same. The aesthetics are slightly different. They go between 120 and 135 US dollars, depending on whether you get the Game 1 or the PC37X and where you buy it from. But they're right in that price range. They're wired. There's no wireless option. You got to plug them into the controller. But finally, something that I considered somewhat acceptable sound-wise, I found them a little bit bass shy, but these are an open back headset. The main thing was that they weren't super easy to drive. Now, looking at the frequency response measurement that ratings got, it's like, yeah, no surprise. They're basically linear. They basically adhere to the Harman headphone curve. They're probably the most accurate that there was. But they do start to roll off in the bass because they're an open back design, and some of the treble is a little bit missing in the highest of the highs. They look real similar to like the HD 559s from Sennheiser. In fact, I think that's what they are, but with a microphone built in. The microphone is reasonable. It's not the very best microphone, but it's completely reasonable. But yeah, the PC37X, the Game 1, that version, they weren't like super easy to drive, which means since they are wired and I'm plugging them into the controller to send them the sound and transmit the audio and the microphone, I'd like something a little easier to drive. So I ended up with the Drop / Sennheiser PC38X. They go for 170 US dollars. They are also wired. Now, these are using like upgraded drivers that come out of the higher end series, like the 600 series out of Sennheiser. So they're actually a fairly decent deal as far as just price-wise goes, if you were comparing them to comparable headphones. Compared to the very best headphones that I have, they maybe lack a little bit of the highest upper treble air, but they extend deeper in the bass than the PC37Xs. They actually probably try to go a little bit too low in the bass, because if you turn them up, there's some distortion out there. The microphone is decent, and as a point of reference, I'm recording this on the headset's microphone so that you can have a reference of what the microphone quality sounds like. But overall, they were the best headset that I tried. They were maybe the only one I found acceptable even. So I'm holding them up on YouTube. I've got them. I've kept them. They do just have the standard 3.5 millimeter TRSS plug to plug them straight into the controller. Flip up the microphone to mute them. Flip it down to activate. So that's very easy. They have a completely unnecessary volume attenuator on the ear cup, because that's all it is. These are not active. They don't have an amplifier built in. You cannot boost the sound any louder, but you can decrease the volume right on the headset itself. Completely unnecessary, and the type of thing that you might accidentally turn down and wonder why everything got quieter than it should. But they're efficient. They're easy to drive off of the headphone jack of your controller. The sound quality is good. The extension is good. They lack a little bit of air in the absolute upper treble if you're critically listening to them for music. But I do find that acceptable, and they're pretty darn linear in their response. So yeah, that's where I ended up. If you were looking for a gaming headset recommendation from AVRant, there, I just gave it. It's probably more expensive than I would have liked to pay. I would have loved a wireless option where I didn't have to plug them into the controller, but I am just kind of appalled at how bad all of these headsets that are marketed specifically at gamers are. I think you're being ripped off. Putting RGB on a headset is stupid, especially when the sound quality is just atrocious. I can't believe how bad so many of the microphones were. Just super disappointing. I don't know how reviewers are giving any of these things anything remotely close to a positive review. I guess they're comparing it against stuff that's even worse somehow. Just eye-opening. Kind of the reason why I got away from forums and did a lot of testing of speakers and stuff for myself, and I had to do it again with these headsets, and that's where I ended up. So, will Sennheiser continue on now that the consumer brand is owned by a different company? I don't know, but you can still get the PC38Xs from Drop right now for $170, and they might be worth your while. You can plug them into anything, and they work, and they sound decent. They actually sound decent, and the microphone is okay. There you go. So, let's go back and thank our listeners of the week. Levi and Kevin, they donated via PayPal on the website, AVRant.com. Thank you so much for those PayPal donations. Patreon.com/AVRant Podcast if you would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. So, thanks so much to our 126 patrons over there, Rob and Fred. Thank you both very much for being two of those 126 patrons. DJ, thanks for talking us up, as you most often do on your episodes of Brightside Home Theater Podcast. But congratulations on having gotten to meet and chat with Brent Butterworth. I could tell that you really enjoyed that, so that was wonderful. Folks, go over there and listen to that episode. If you don't listen to any others, listen to that episode, because Brent Butterworth is always a good person to listen to. And then thanks to Bob, Rob W., Andrew, Jay, Billy, and Fred for your notes of gratitude and encouragement, notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going throughout weather and pandemics and scheduling and all of this crazy stuff. Happy to keep it going. Thank you so much to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. The place to send those questions is question@avrant.com, our email address. That's how to reach us. That's how to get your question onto the podcast. So question@avrant.com. Thanks very much to everybody. On behalf of Tom Andry, this has been AV Rant. I am Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.